I put away my electronics. Good afternoon, and thank you, Lisa and Asian Contemporary Art Week for having me. It's been a really stimulating day for me, and I'm really delighted to be here in the middle of this conversation, which traffics itself across such large distances in such a wonderful and generous way. I'm going to be representing a three-headed hydra, RAQS Media Collective. We have three people. We take turns at being one of the heads sometimes. I'm here at the moment, so I'll tell the story. And that's what I see myself as doing, telling you the sort of story.
Microphone.
So this one? Okay. Am I audible now?
No.
No? Still not? Do you want me to talk with this one? Okay. Thank you. Even closer. So as I was saying, my job here is to tell you a story. Sort of not a lullaby, not something I hope that will put you to sleep, but just something that will keep the conversation going. Because in any story, one has to start by waiting for the story. And that waiting is what the beginning of a story is. You begin a story by saying once upon a time or something or the other, and then everyone waits and says, what next? And then what happened? And in the practice of RAQS Media Collective, which is something that's been together, we have been together for now 25 years, we've been saying this, and then what next? What next? Because it's founded on that conversation. It's founded on the ability to tell each other a story and to surprise each other constantly. This conversation has expanded since time, from time onwards now, to include, we like to think, everybody in the world. Anybody, everybody, somebody, anyone who is here, the 7 billion people of the planet. And before you think that that's a kind of megalomaniac assertion, I want to say, like Don Quixote said to Sancho Panza, that he writes letters to Dulcinea, whose address who does not know. We too are seeking, in a sense, the addressees of our stories and our puzzles and our tales, although we don't know who they are. And at this moment, they are you, right? And that gradually expands so that the story becomes something that's quite alive and takes on characteristics of all times, for all places, for people at an individual level. What you see here is a drawing of a map of the conversation and the signal traffic between the three computers of RAQS Media Collective. On one afternoon, where we actually invited a programmer friend of ours to render the traffic between our computers and the world. And that is basically the story of our conversation. That drawing, that mesh, finds its way into all sorts of things. It finds its way into performances, so part of it becomes the sign for infinity. This is from a performance that we did in Performar last year, the last international, which was our attempt to go from here to infinities of different kinds. It finds itself on museum shows when we produce our work and try and embed everything that we're doing within the story of that conversation. It even finds itself in a place which is not far from where Mr. Cotter was talking about the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. This is the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, where we spent some time, like he did in his childhood, looking at these incredible artworks from different parts of the world. Here is an artwork, an 18th century Japanese screen called The Three Tasters, which references a classical motif in Chinese painting. Three sages, the Buddha, Lao Tzu, and Confucius, taste vinegar, or it could be wine, and they come up with different interpretations of what it tastes like. For the Buddha, it's bitter. For Confucius, it's sour. And for Lao Tzu, it's sweet. That disagreement could be the story of the RAQS Media Collective. We've been tasting the same vinegar or transforming it into wine, but we've never agreed about what it tastes like. So what we thought we would do was to create a carpet, which again has on it the story of our conversation, an image of our conversation, a place to sit on and consider the three tasters arguing and disagreeing amongst themselves, which is our story. So here are the three tasters themselves, Lao Tzu, Confucius, and the Buddha. Here is the carpet, which was woven in Bulgaria. So again, another long thread. It woven by a cooperative of 6 Bulgarian carpet weavers based on a rendering of a design of a conversation in Delhi and moving to Boston. The carpet also becomes a place for having other conversations. So it comes out of the gallery and moves into the auditorium of the museum, becomes a setting for having these extended conversations about what the work of a museum is. Here, for instance, we are staging a conversation on the idea of accumulation and gathering itself. So it begins to perform many different kinds of functions. Here it becomes an image in a book. And in this way, the conversation becomes a portrait of itself. And here, for instance, is the self-portrait of the RAQS Media Collective, slightly layered by the projection possibilities. A donkey crossing the road to somewhere forever, the shadow of a camera person on a desert, in a desert, and a person taking the measure of a distance. Each one of us could be playing these roles at different points of time, each head of the Hydra. Sometimes I think I'm the donkey crossing the road to nowhere forever. And that's the three of us, constantly engaged in travel, in conversation, in a matrix of finding the world within ourselves. This image is taken by Monica's daughter, who's 9 years old, under a tree called the El Tule in Mexico, which is one of the world's largest trees. So it's kind of nice to be sheltered by something that can actually give shade to at least 80 to 100 people at the same time. It again becomes an image of the matrix that can host and can be hospitable to meetings and gatherings of all times. Sometimes the conversation finds its partners, and we've always found characters who become our companions in a journey. Here, for instance, is an elephant who, since there was some talk about Buddhist traditions and storytelling, we thought that we might reference one of our little stories that we've always found interesting, which is a Jataka tale. Jataka tale are birth stories of the Buddha, and in which he could be an animal, a monkey, a king, a washerwoman, many things. So here, for instance, these are normally lenticular images, but I'm just showing you one of the images, is a story about the shadow of an elephant taken in Shanghai, where we are going to be working a lot this year. And the story is called On the Undertaking to Entertain an Empty Metropolis. And I'm going to do something quite strange, which is I'm going to play another story as an image while I read another story. This is about the story about a helicopter that became a Buddha, and I thought it might be interesting to think about a helicopter since we saw helicopters in the morning, and while I talk about an elephant. But that's the way it is. On the undertaking to entertain an empty metropolis. Confronted with the dereliction of a once great city, a conjuring elephant, who had been the star attraction of a traveling circus that had fallen on hard times, decided to entertain all that remained. He was the lone survivor of the mysterious catastrophe that had befallen the city. The animal told jokes, did headstands, and carried on a practiced ringside banter across 15 of the abandoned city's 23 official languages. Nobody heard the elephant. But that is besides the point. It is, however, said that a solitary lamppost was so entranced by the demonstrations of memory, reasoning, juggling, and calculation that the elephant adroitly performed that it lit up of its own accord. Traffic islands blossomed when they witnessed its acrobatic feats, and pavements that had always been askew found new and sympathetic alignments. A door that had been forever padlocked in a warehouse suddenly found itself ajar. There were many other miracles that went unreported. In this way, the elephant was able to momentarily transmit and transfer its generous sentience to a metropolis that had become as barren of consciousness as the moon is of life. And so, that which appeared lifeless was quickened into animation. The elephant found enlightenment within its grasp in that limbo between appearance and essence. But its innate compassion prevented it from leaving the city to its mute posterity. And so the magnificent beast left its shadow on the wall. The city fell asleep again, dreaming that an elephant had come to entertain. We're like that elephant. We leave our shadow, we leave our traces. We sometimes find what we might think of as enlightenment within our grasp, but then we let go because the world is too attractive. The stories are too seductive. Our friendships are too intense, and we don't want to let go. And that's what we do when we make whatever we're making. We become, for each other, what we call the third man. The third man is a phenomenon in mountaineering where people often experience hallucinations of a person who accompanies them and says, you can walk the next few steps and I'll walk with you. And it's that third man that always, in a sense, all sorts of people experience it. Airline pilots or people who travel at very high altitudes, climbers, mountaineers, people who are crossing deserts, people who are deep-sea divers. And in the Islamic tradition, for instance, the third man becomes the Khwaja Khizr, the prophet who guides you when you're lost. Some people believe it's the same person as the prophet Elias. So the third man, whose face you never properly see, who is always by your side, is for us the reason why we do what we are. The third man is the RAQS Media Collective to each one of us. And it's interesting that sometimes the third man can take on beastly forms. He can become an elephant, he can become a lost rhinoceros. This is Albrecht Dürer's rhinoceros who got capsized in the Mediterranean Sea and then became a carousal animal in our imagination and found a home in a garden. He can become a deep-sea diver, also a friend of the rhinoceros. The deep-sea diver, again, because we looked at astronauts this morning, I thought we might as well look at deep-sea divers, people who take us further from ourselves than we're accustomed to doing. And here, for instance, the deep-sea diver is a visitor to an exhibition. The deep-sea diver is a role that any visitor can play in an exhibition of the RAQS Media Collective. And the deep-sea diver here will take you on a bit of a journey.
¿Se puede marchitar la libertad si no se riega?
¿Se puede vivir como si no hubiera tiempo?
¿Existirá una sola era para crear un cambio?
¿Se puede conseguir la libertad o hay que conquistarla?
¿Puede la libertad ser la liberación de uno mismo?
Some more space travel. This time in an astronomical observatory. This is from a work called Strikes at Time, which features the adventures of an industrial worker who writes diaries, and in many of these are from a found diary that we've been working on with friends of ours who are young writers in Delhi. It's the diary of a worker who committed suicide, but whose main intention was to be able to claim from the night all that this person had lost in the day. And the main line of each diary entry, after, for instance, listing, I bought milk for 20 rupees, I went out to see a movie, I had tea with 3 friends. After all of these acts are listed, there's always a line that says, everything else is ordinary. Or the line that you heard the deep-sea diver listening to, todo es más es ordinario. Which becomes, in a sense, a way of reminding ourselves about the fact that if everything else is ordinary, there must be something extraordinary in every day. And it's that which is the extraordinary and the miraculous in every day, in the quotidian, which is the main reason for us to keep telling our stories. that figure of the everyday and that figure of the third man, every man, can also become another constant companion. Things that happen while falling in love, things that's PowerPoint doing it, it's not me. Shadows of figures that seem to be exiting situations at all times, providing us with signs towards departures. And oops, I've never seen that before. From those figures, I'd like to move to another set of stories, the stories of relics. And these are, this is work that's just coming down now. It's been packed and put back into crates from Venice Biennale, where it was, lining the avenues, the broad avenues between the big pavilions. And here, a work that we call Coronation Park, which is so big that almost no one saw it. I met many friends from India who went to see the Venice Biennale and who sat on these steps and asked me questions like, where is your work? So, which was very, very interesting, and I really like that, because if you can produce work that no one can see and is really right in front of them in 12 foot, then you've got a job in the camouflage industry. But these are, these are, in a sense, our conversation with the relics of the British Empire in many parts of the world, or empires in general. I come from a country that's not as much post-colonial as it's trying to be pre-imperial, so this will be the future of India as well. And these relics, these studied gentlemen and posers, viceroys and governors and generals, are annotated quite sharply. So here is a person, for instance, who's left their robe behind their majesty. It's the opposite of the, what's that story? Yeah, these are maybe the emperor's old clothes, so the ones that he left behind. But they're annotated by these plaques that you can see, for instance, over here. Here it says, it was at this moment as he stood there with the weapon in his hands that he first grasped the hollowness, the futility. This is fragments from George Orwell's essay, Shooting the Elephant, which is one of the most remarkable insights into the hubris of imperial power from the inside. And we thought it would be very interesting to make this annotation into the broad pavilion of the Giardini in Venice, which in a sense is the story of the succession of great empires and powers. So if there we can see a faceless viceroy grasping the futility of, incidentally, just behind him is the United States Pavilion, which had the wonderful work by Joan Jonas, and the Israeli Pavilion, which had also an interesting work. But it was interesting to locate a statement like this about the futility of weapons and the hollowness of power at the very intersection of two major presences in the world. And then to counting, which is also part of our story. This is a work that takes the ghost of a handprint, a peasant's hands from 1857, this handprint was transferred to Britain, where it remained for a long time in the laboratory of a man called Francis Galton, who was a eugenicist, and who initiated the research that led to fingerprinting. So the 4 fingers that I put on in the immigration counter, or the biometrics that we process and deliver to the powers that be, this is the ancestor of all of that activity. And what we thought about in terms of doing this, the story that this image tells us is about the futility of counting, because counting, let's say, 1 billion people in the Indian population, with the Indian government wants to put up a proposal called the Unique Identification Database, UID, Untold Intimacy of Digits, is a proposition that is bound to fail. There are no computers at present that will ever be powerful enough to process 1 billion fingerprints or 1 billion fingerprints into 5 or 10. So as a homage to that futility and to that futile gesture, and by saying that when you count, and each time this piece is shown anywhere, it counts a little further to infinity, we point the difference and the tension between the effort to measure and the immeasurable. Finally, I want to show you some pictures from a work that references the Mahabharata. This is our version of the Mahabharata. a correspondence with K.D. Vyas. The morning began with Anthony Lee's wonderful sort of exercise in acquainting us with its. Oh. Anyway. Is anyone from Microsoft here? What happened was that this sculptural installation was an effort at continuing an exchange of letters or correspondence with a figure called Krishna Dvaipayan Vyas, the namesake of the other guy, the one who talked to Arjun this morning. Krishna Dvaipayan Vyas is the redactor or the editor of the Mahabharata, and he's one of the supposed immortals. This might take several minutes, and the Mahabharata took a long time to tell. But while it takes several minutes, what I want to say is that because he's considered to be one of the 8 immortals of Indic mythology, it could be possible that a gentleman called K.D. Vyas, who sounds like a retired government officer, would still be in Delhi writing letters to the editor of the kind that complain about everything. And we decided that this was absolutely necessary for us to have a conversation with such a person. And the Mahabharata here becomes then an engine of that conversation. I guess lots of things are happening on the screen that I have no control over. Just keep talking. I wanted to end. The last slide was a gift to Lisa. So I don't know if that's going to come up. Anyway. It said it was shutting down? That has to be done from over there. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Maybe just this will have to play, that's all. Let it play, and then I'll talk about it. Some of you might know this song. Up. I was trying to keep to time, and I was, just. Does this mean it's going to happen for all the other presentations? No. Just for me. It's a little song from a film called Kabuliwala. I can tell you the story of the song. It's a story written by Rabindranath Tagore about a tradesman, an itinerant salesman of different kinds, a moneylender, who is from Afghanistan, from Kabul, and this is a character that we know very well from childhood. In all children in Indian cities, particularly in Calcutta, for instance, are always warned, never talk to strangers, and especially not to the Kabuliwala, not to the guy from Kabul. A little girl called Minnie gets lost and falls in with a Kabuliwala who misses his own daughter and sees this girl as his daughter. And then they have many adventures across the city. She becomes his accomplice. They become great friends. And the song is at the end of the story when Minnie has been taken back by her parents and everybody thinks that the Kabuliwala is a crazy guy. Although she sees him in her dreams all the time. And he's just exhausted and sitting by the river, and someone starts singing a song about where does the river come from, and it's the Ganges. And he's just singing this song about where does this river come from, where does it go, who's on the river, who's swimming, who's drowning, all sorts of things. It's a song that my father used to sing a lot. I was thinking about it when Holland Cotter spoke at the end of his presentation about his teacher showing a slide of their parents. And the song was always, for me, a way of thinking that wherever you are, currents have come from elsewhere. For instance, in my life, or in our life, from Afghanistan. The language that we speak, the lot of things that we do, are actually deeply implicated in terms of a long history of conversation with different parts of Asia. That's how we are who we are. And then they have this sort of sentimental dialogue between the guy who sings the song and the Kabuliwala, the Afghan trader, saying, I don't know who you are, you don't know who I am, we don't even speak each other's language, but you know, whatever there is between us. So, like in the RAQS Media Collective, I am not the artist, neither is Monica nor is Jabesh. Whatever is the artist is between us in our conversation. So that's why I wanted to begin with a conversation and end with this song. But since it didn't play, you'll have to hear it on YouTube yourself. Thank you.
So, well, before starting, I need to mention that this is a short version of an ongoing project that I'm working at the moment, and it can be thought as like a long preview of this project. Most of the slides that I'm going to show are going to be in black and white, and also English is neither my first language nor my second. Today I'm going to share with you a vague idea, a project I've been developing for the last few years. There are keywords that you will hear regularly during the next 14 minutes. Bicamera, accident, gun, alien, refugee, brain, memory are a few to mention. In brief, and to give you a loose structure in mind, we will go together over 3 different episodes that have influenced me around the idea of immigration, bicamerality, and violence. The first episode is about the refugee crisis that is happening at the moment, mostly from Syria to Europe. The second is the encounter of an individual regarding her own status as an alien. And the last one is the tragic incident of the killing of an immigrant musician band by a fellow immigrant with an expired visa. In the end, I will explore the relation between violence and immigration and the role of displacement and its effect to the human brain. The refugee question in Europe is somewhat similar to the gun question here in the States. Calling each a crisis when their consequences fill the headlines seems to bring some kind of enjoyment, possibly because crisis implies change and perhaps a resolution. What is actually taking place is a series of episodes, awful and familiar, each being a foreseeable result of a set of policies. When the policies brings about the death of innocents at Columbine and Sandy Hooks, Lampedusa and Bodrum, a brief window emerges during which it seems like the policy would change. For now, let's explain this series of episodes through the familiar Syrian toddler, Aylan Kurdi. His parents had fled Kobani and lived as refugees in Turkey. They had hoped eventually to join Aylan's aunt in Canada. She had written a letter to her members at Parliament to ask for help. But the process was slow and uncertain, and her brother decided to arrange a smuggler to carry his family to Greece via clandestine boat. The boat capsized and Aylan drowned, along with his brother, his mother, and 8 other refugees. Aylan, neatly dressed in a red polo shirt and rubber sole shoes, washed up on a Turkish beach. The image of his drowned body circulated on the internet and social medias under the hashtag Kia Vuran Instalik. The image in circulation brought a recognizably human scale to a diffuse problem that had turned into a remote reality. The week before, it was 71 immigrants who suffocated in a delivery truck on the side of an Austrian highway. Last April, 800 drowned in a single shipwreck off the Libyan coast. Less than 2 years earlier, more than 350 Eritreans drowned at Lampedusa within a quarter mile of Italian soil. Soon enough, more numbers of casualties will be released. Today's legal protections for refugees were largely drawn up in the question to the Holocaust. Barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind, as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights puts in. Some have found reminders of the Holocaust in the current Syrian situation. To name a few, the trains with locked doors, the razor wire plant for the Hungarian border, and the Czech officials who penned number on Syrian hands until the resonances were pointed out. If today calamities are often brought about by inequality, not fascism or tyranny, these catastrophes have prompted a similar debate. This debate opposes, on the one hand, humanitarians who still see the West as a sanctuary for the tempted souls, and on the other hand, isolationists who want to protect the crown castle with walls and moats. The vehement discussions might turn into hope for future possible change in policies. Yet the death we are now seeing just outside our gates might be the strongest argument for raising them. If someone has no home to return to, how much hospitality does she deserve? Well, this episode that I'm going to tell is not as dramatic as the previous one, and also not as tragic as the next one. It is just one simple personal example to understand some situation an immigrant might face. This is a confidential story that occurred to a very, very close friend of mine. I will try to deliver it today as clear as I remember. Her real name is of no importance, so I keep her identity hidden. I will switch between he and she and her and his regularly. He moved to the US a few years ago holding an F1, which is the student visa, to get his master's degree. After finishing school, she stayed another year in the US with her OPT, but she wasn't successful enough to find a steady job. He entered the grace period while looking for a plan to stay in the US for a longer period. His only weakness was the inability to manage big tasks in her life. For the important to-dos, he always tries her best to postpone, to forget. On a cold morning of September 2014, my friend woke up to grab a coffee with her girlfriend at a new cafe place near her place. It was very early, so they didn't talk that much while walking, like the pre-coffee time in the morning. She remembered a specific moment, the point in time she started seeing things on the peripheries of his vision. We can practice right now. So if you look straight in front of you, try to focus on things that you see in the outer limits of your vision. For example, now I can see you wearing white, someone wearing here, glasses, but you just feel them. You don't see how they really look like. That's how she described it to me. And she starts seeing 2 or 3 persons getting close to her. One of them approached her with a letter-sized paper in hand. There was an identity photo from her driving license on it. The stranger asked his name, she understood something was wrong. She answered with a low tone, yes. He got sure he had done something wrong, and he started revisiting all the recent things he might have done wrongly. The guy introduced himself as Joe. He presented his ID card as an officer of some immigration office. While making eye contact with his girlfriend, my friend realized that the stranger were smartly encircled them with 120-degree distance from each other. Things looked very serious. No gun was involved or even visible, but she knew it always if it happened the potential to appear if there was any inappropriate move. The main officer informed her about her expired visa and noticed him that he needed to come to the downtown building. Handcuffed, he was asked to get inside a car, a white Ford Escape. He had to sit in a 45-degree to not have his hand pressed behind the back and the seat. During the drive, he was looking outside of the car, doubting when he would be able to see this path again. Very cliché over romantic. There is always a reason for a cliché that it has become a cliché. Looking around the car, she noticed a binocular. She thought about all the possible scenes they might have observed before arresting him in the morning. She told me the drive was about an hour, but according to Google Maps, it's a 25-minute drive with red traffic. I asked my friend to reenact the drive with me as a favor. He accepted. We used a different car, but I knew it would not change the result that much. He told me it was raining that day, so we added few minutes because people drive very slow when it rains in San Francisco. The reenactment took about 9 minutes and 40 seconds, plus 15-minute traffic, which makes it about 25 minutes total. So we are here talking about 35 minutes of abstractions. Long story short, she was interrogated for a few hours in a sort of empty and abandoned gray stainless steel room and then got released. The officers were polite. They asked questions like any other form to fill, using known strategies such as repeating the same questions, but with different vocabulary. One she specifically mentioned was if she had any tattoos. The officer called his girlfriend with his cell phone. She came and picked him up with a cup of coffee of Starbucks with whipped cream. The most horrible moment for her was when the officer called him back and asked him to come back to the building. They had forgotten something. At that time, she imagined the worst things. She got there and she signed the last page they had failed to ask him to sign. Since then, he doesn't talk about the incident to anyone. I'm telling you this story, this one, episode 4, based on what I've heard from friends, read in newspaper, websites, notes from virtual friends on social media and other sources. About 2 years ago, a gunman went on a rampage through a Brooklyn building, killing few people and then himself before police arrived. I read that it was a chilly night and the moon was shining, half full, but I can't recall exactly the number of deaths of the incident. I would say 4 or 5. It sounds like the difference between mathematics and physics. The following was published in a local magazine. Quote, on November 11, 2013, officials found 2 of the founding members of a rock band shot dead, along with an associate, on a different floors of a 5-story building. On the roof, they said they discovered another man dead with a self-inflicted gunshot wound in the head with a rifle next to his body, unquote. Originally, media reports described the killer as a former band member who had been thrown out of the band 3 days before. Later, reports stated that he had never been an official member of the band. Rather, he had been hanging out with them since being expelled in 2012 from a different immigrant rock band. His exact motive wasn't clear, but the Times pointed to, quote, decaying friendship between their small community of Iranian American artists, unquote. Before reviewing this anecdote together, I want you to think about this story without any judgment. Try not to form any opinion about the person who killed and the person who was killed for a few seconds. I beg you. Choose if you want to be the victim or the killer. Then think about the last argument you had with a friend of yours. Not necessarily a huge fight, some sort of fight, we all have. You know what I'm talking about. Now I want to invite you to reflect on all of these episodes simultaneously. Immigrants are moving from a place to another. Few refugees were shot dead by an old friend few years after living in the other place. And an alien got arrested while he was debating whether she wanted to stay or leave that new place. The alien is moving from one place to another, often from one culture to another, and usually from a language to another. Our brain's capacity of understanding is beyond reach, but at least it is trained to handle one culture at a time. When I talk to my friends now in my mother tongue, I unconsciously go back and forth between English and the other language. This is when my brain gets tired. I remember the first months that I moved to the States, I always fell asleep during all my seminar classes. The brain gets confused and it jumps between A and B. This is the moment of conflict. The brain tries to check facts, but the language and visuals do not match. The moment of conflict is when the alien with a bicameral mind might be produced. It is a possibility and not inherent to every single alien. A variety of parameters need to coincide to turn a bicameral brain of an alien to a violent one. From our observation of a collection of brains from immigrants, my team and I believe that displacement may create an aggressive side effect on brain. Thinking of the story episode 4, we can assume the bicamerality of the gunman is the main cause of the accident. Based on the multiple interviews I had with people who knew both the shooter and the victims, and considering the power of anger, we presume the gunman heard voices that guided him through the incident, maybe the third man that we just heard. Few questions emerge about immigrants. First, what would be the language in which they are hearing these voices? Do they hear these voices in one language and answer them in another one? If you want to go deeper to the issue, you can also think about all the visual complexity of a bicameral immigrant brain that might experience. But we must not leave this subject of hallucinatory mechanism without addressing the most profound question of why such voices are believed, why obey. A schizophrenic person recently told his physicians, quote, "If what I'm hearing is not a real voice, then you are not really talking to me right now," unquote. I have told you the story of my friend in episode 2 so that you would hear me to the end. I hope that you heard my voice as a real one. I am my friend in episode 2. Now, despise me.